My name is Diana Mercer. I am 34 years old, and the moment I want to tell you about happened on a Saturday afternoon in July, at a long folding table set astring in my aunt's backyard in Asheville, North Carolina, with 27 members of my family watching. My father was standing. He had a glass of sweet tea in one hand, and that particular smile on his face, the one he wore when he was performing for an audience. The table had gone quiet because he had tapped his fork against the glass. That was what he always did when he had something to say. He always had something to say. "I want to propose a toast," he began. He looked around the table slowly, deliberately, making sure every face had turned toward him before he continued. "To family, to hard work, to the people in this family who actually made something of themselves." He let that word hang in the air for just a moment. "Actually, to my son Thomas, who designed the Greenfield Bridge at 37. To my son-in-law Kevin, who just opened his second real estate office. To my daughter Renee, who is finishing her MBA at Duke." He raised his glass. 26 people raised their glasses. "And to Diana," he added, his voice dropping just half a register, his smile stretching a little wider, "our little nurse, who is still out there changing bedpans and doing God's work for the rest of us," he chuckled. Several people at the table laughed. Someone near the far end said, "Bless her heart," which in Asheville means something that is not a blessing. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I looked directly at my father across the table, and I lifted my glass and I drank. What he did not know was that 11 days earlier I had received a letter via certified mail from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, confirming the approval of patent number 11,423,812, a medical device patent, in my name. What he did not know was that the chief executive officer of Ardmore Health Systems, a regional hospital network with 14 facilities across North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, had called me personally 3 weeks before the reunion to schedule a formal meeting. What he did not know was that the meeting had already taken place, that the partnership documents had already been prepared, and that the total value of the initial agreement was $425,000. What he absolutely did not know was that she was going to be in my aunt's backyard before the afternoon was over, because I had invited her. I did not move. I sat at that table in the town where I grew up, in the family that had spent 34 years constructing a version of me that was smaller and simpler and more manageable than the real thing, and I let them laugh. This is that story. Before we continue, I want to pause and ask you something directly. Where in the world are you right now? What time is it where you are? I genuinely want to know. Drop it in the comments below. Tell me your city, your country, the time on your clock, whatever is outside your window right now. And if you have ever sat at a table where someone who was supposed to love you described you to a room full of people and got you entirely wrong, I want you to hit the like button and subscribe, because this channel was built for you. Every single story here was built for the woman who has been holding her breath and waiting for the room to catch up. My father's name is Robert Mercer. He is 61 years old. He spent 32 years as a structural engineer for Buncombe County, which means he designed bridges and drainage systems and public infrastructure, useful and solid and necessary work that he nonetheless managed, through the particular gravity of his ego, to transform into a professional identity that he believed outranked everyone in any room he entered. He stands 5 feet 11 inches tall. He has silver hair he keeps carefully combed. He possesses the specific confidence of a man who has never once been interrupted and told his opinion was unnecessary. He retired at 59 on a county pension and a retirement account he called his legacy fund. He is the kind of man who uses the word legacy without irony. He has 3 children. My brother Thomas is 37. An architect in Charlotte with a firm of his own. My sister Renee is 29, working toward her MBA at Duke on a partial scholarship. And then there is me, Diana, the nurse. My mother's name is Sandra Mercer. She is 58 years old. She taught 4th grade for 25 years and retired the spring before the reunion. Sandra is not unkind the way my father is unkind. She operates differently. Her weapon is absence where presence is needed. The smile held in place a beat too long. The subject changed at the precise moment it becomes uncomfortable. She has spent 4 decades redirecting my father's sharper edges and calling it keeping the peace. She loves me. I have never doubted that she loves me. She loves the version of me she decided on when I was 11 years old and told her I wanted to be a doctor. My father had laughed and said that girls from families like ours did not go to medical school, that they married doctors. My mother had not disagreed. She had asked if I wanted a snack. I remembered that, the snack question, for a long time after. It was the moment I understood that her love would always be present and never quite protective. I became a nurse, not because I believed my father, because I was 18 years old, working part-time at a Waffle House on Merrimon Avenue to save money for college applications, and the nursing scholarship came through before anything else did. I took it. I was not going to wait for something better to come along and let something real pass me by. I enrolled at UNC Asheville, graduated summa cum laude in 3.5 years, passed my NCLEX licensure examination on the first attempt, and accepted a position at Mission Hospital in the cardiac step-down unit before I was 22 years old. I was good at my work. I was genuinely very good at it. I was the kind of nurse other nurses came to when a situation felt uncertain, and they needed someone who would stay calm and think clearly. I was the kind of nurse that physicians on my unit trusted. I was the kind of nurse who did not take credit publicly for things and was therefore, in the logic of my family, not accomplishing things. But to Robert Mercer, a nurse was not a doctor, and a daughter who was a nurse was in his private taxonomy of achievement, confirmation of his longest-held theory, which was that Diana had always been the pretty one and not the smart one, the kind one and not the ambitious one, the dependable one and not the remarkable one. He delivered this assessment with warmth, as if he were paying me a compliment that happened also to be a ceiling. Diana's so nurturing, he would tell people at gatherings. She was always better with people than with books. He said it the way a man says something he is proud to have figured out. It was not a compliment. It was a verdict delivered without a trial. I want to tell you 3 specific memories, because they will help you understand who my father is, and they will help you understand why I kept my secret for 4 years. The first memory is from when I was 23. I had just been offered a charge nurse position on my cardiac unit. The promotion came with greater responsibility, a shift in authority, and a salary increase from $41,000 a year to $48,000 a year. I called home to tell my parents. My father answered. I told him everything, the promotion, the new role, the raise. There was a pause that lasted several seconds. Then he said, "So what does charge nurse mean exactly?" "Like, you're still a nurse?" I explained what the position entailed. He said, "Oh, I thought maybe you'd gone back to school for something." He passed the phone to my mother. She said she was proud of me and asked whether I was eating enough vegetables. The second memory is from Thanksgiving, 2 years before the reunion. My cousin Bradley had just made partner at his law firm in Charlotte, at 32 years old. The family was gathered at my Aunt Paula's house, which is the same house where the reunion later took place. My father stood up at the dinner table and gave a 10-minute speech about Bradley. He talked about the Mercer family name. He talked about what it meant to persevere. He talked about excellence. He talked about what this family was capable of when it applied itself. When he sat down, someone asked him how things were going for me. My father picked up his fork. "Diana's still doing her nursing thing," he said. "She seems happy enough." He started eating. I was sitting 4 seats to his left. I heard every word. I cut my turkey into very small pieces and I finished my dinner and I did not say anything at all. The third memory is the most important one. It was 14 months before the reunion, a Tuesday evening in May, at a dinner my parents hosted at their home on Kimberly Avenue. Thomas and his wife Kim were there. Renee was there. 2 longtime neighbors, the Hendersons, a couple who had known our family for close to 20 years, were also at the table. My father had made his pot roast, which he considered his signature dish, and he had opened a bottle of red wine, and he had an announcement. He leaned forward and he looked at each of his children in turn. "I've been thinking about what each of you is building," he said. Thomas has his firm. Renee has her future ahead of her. And Diana, he looked at me with something that I can only describe as affectionate limitation. Diana is out there making the world a little more comfortable for the sick people in it. He smiled. He meant it exactly the way he said it. He had no idea what was happening in my life because I had not told him. And I had not told him because I had learned, over decades, that telling Robert Mercer something before it was finished and permanent was sanding him a new way to diminish it. So I smiled at him from across the dinner table. I said, "That's right, Dad." I refilled my wine glass. I said nothing else. The work that would eventually become patent, number 11,423,812, began in the spring of 4 years before the reunion, with a problem I had been watching for months on my cardiac unit. We had a patient, a 71-year-old man I will call Mr. Howard, who had just had a pacemaker implanted. It was a standard procedure, a routine recovery. What was not routine was what happened at 11:20 at night, when the telemetry system displayed a rhythm pattern that my instinct flagged before the alert did. The monitoring equipment on our unit required nurses to manually cross-reference 3 separate screens to confirm arrhythmia patterns. There was also a signal delay of 3 to 4 seconds, which does not sound like a significant amount of time, until you understand that certain atrial fibrillation events can escalate in under 5 seconds, and that a 3 to 4 second blind spot in substances is the difference between intervention and emergency. I had filed 2 official incident reports about the delay. Both were reviewed. Both were categorized as within acceptable operational parameters. I went home that night after my shift at 11:15, and I sat at my kitchen table on Clingman Avenue with a blue pen and a spiral notebook, and I wrote 7 pages of notes. I was not an engineer. I had no formal training in medical device design. What I had was 4 years of watching a monitoring system fail patients in ways that the engineers who designed it had apparently never stood in a cardiac unit long enough to witness. What I had was a nursing degree, a mind that had always been more analytically precise than my father ever suspected, and a very specific anger about a very specific problem that I was not willing to leave unsolved. I enrolled in an online biomedical engineering certificate program through Georgia Tech the following month. I took classes after night shifts, on days off, during holidays. I bought textbooks I read in the break room between patient checks and in the parking garage on my lunch breaks. I sat at my kitchen table on weekend mornings with coffee going cold beside me and worked through signal processing problems and algorithm logic, while my phone stayed face down and quiet. I told no one. My roommate at the time, a woman named Bridget who worked as a physical therapist, knew I was taking online classes. She did not know what kind. I did not explain. I joined a clinical innovation working group at Mission Hospital, a small informal gathering of nurses, physicians, and one retired biomedical device engineer named Harold Finch, who met on the second Thursday of every month in a conference room on the 4th floor. The group had 11 members. Most of them attended inconsistently. Harold never missed a meeting. Harold Finch was 73 years old, slight and white-haired, with reading glasses he wore, pushed up on his forehead, and a habit of writing equations on paper napkins. He had spent 31 years working in medical device development for a company in Research Triangle Park, and he had the particular sharpness of a man who has been doing hard technical work for so long that the performance of being smart no longer interests him. He had no patience for pretense. He had complete patience for difficulty. He was the first person in any professional setting who had ever spoken to me as an intellectual equal from the first 5 minutes of our acquaintance. He looked at my 7 pages from the kitchen table on Clingman Avenue, and he said, after approximately 4 minutes of silence, "This is very good. This is actually quite good." I held on to that sentence for a long time. Harold and I began meeting separately, outside the working group on Sunday mornings at a coffee shop on Lexington Avenue near his apartment. We would sit for 2 or 3 hours and work through the design problems together. He would push back on my reasoning with precision and without ego. When I was wrong, he told me directly and explained why. When I was right, he said so and moved on without ceremony. It was the most productive intellectual relationship of my life, and I was aware even then of how rare that was. There were moments during those 14 months when I almost stopped, not because the work was too hard, but because the isolation of it was heavy in ways I had not anticipated. My family was continuing their lives without knowing what I was doing. My father called once in that period and spent 20 minutes telling me about Thomas's new commission and Renee's scholarship renewal. He asked about my work. I said it was good. He said that was nice. We hung up. I sat with my phone in my hand for a moment and then opened my laptop and went back to the signal processing module I had been working on. I kept the work going not despite the silence, but inside it. The silence was protective. Every person who did not know was one less person who could doubt it before it was finished. That is the thing about building something real. It needs to be strong enough to stand before you show it to anyone who might lean on it. Harold and I developed a software-based monitoring integration system that consolidated the 3 separate telemetry screens into a single unified interface, eliminated the signal delay through an algorithm that pre-interpolated rhythm data using a predictive model trained on over 220,000 patient cardiac events drawn from anonymized hospital records, and could flag arrhythmia risk with a lead time that exceeded the existing standard by an average of 8.4 seconds. We called the core design framework the Unified Cardiac Event Monitoring Protocol. We tested the model on retrospective data across 4 separate hospital datasets. The results were consistent and statistically significant. Harold called our results encouraging. I called them the reason I had not slept a full night in 14 months. During the second year, while we were refining the algorithm and preparing the technical documentation for patent filing, I also returned to school. Not to engineering school. I enrolled part-time in a healthcare administration program at Western Carolina University, online, taking 2 courses per semester while working my regular shifts. I wanted to understand the business side of what I was building, the licensing pathway, the hospital procurement process, the clinical trial cost structure. I could see from Harold's experience that the gap between a good idea and a deployed device was filled with business and legal and administrative reality that no one in the technical work prepares you for. I intended to understand every part of the process that I would eventually have to navigate. I graduated with a graduate certificate in healthcare administration in the spring of the year before the reunion. My father did not know I had enrolled. My mother did not know. I received the certificate in the mail and put it in a folder in my desk drawer and went to work. Harold knew a patent attorney in Charlotte named Sylvia Park, who had represented medical technology clients for 18 years. Sylvia reviewed our documentation over 6 weeks in the fall of 2 years before the reunion. She asked detailed questions. She was precise and thorough, and she did not condescend, which I noticed and appreciated. She requested 2 rounds of revisions to the technical specifications and 1 clarification on the algorithm's prior art differentiation. She filed the provisional patent application on November 14th. The full non-provisional application followed the March after that. Sylvia called me on the day she filed it. "Diana," she said, "I want you to understand something. This is real. This is genuinely, substantively real." I thanked her. I went to work. The approval letter arrived 11 days before the family reunion. In a certified envelope I signed for at the post office on Merriman Avenue at 8:47 in the morning. I sat in my car in the parking lot and read it 3 times. My hands did not shake. The only call I made was to Harold. He picked up on the second ring. "It came through," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know Silva already reached me. Diana, do you understand what you've done?" I told him I thought I did. He said, "I don't think you quite do yet, but you will." The conversation with Ardmore Health Systems had begun 4 months before the patent approval. One of their clinical innovation officers had attended a regional nursing conference the previous October, where Harold had given a presentation on emerging monitoring integration methodology. Harold had referenced our work without naming it specifically, but he had been descriptive enough that the officer followed up. By January, I had spoken by telephone with 3 people at Ardmore. By March, I had a formal meeting scheduled with their chief executive officer. I prepared for that meeting the way I had prepared for everything in the preceding 4 years, which is to say thoroughly and without telling my family a single word about it. I reviewed Ardmore's publicly available financial statements. I studied their existing monitoring infrastructure. I prepared a 12-page technical brief with Sylvia's input. I drove to Charlotte the day before and stayed overnight at a hotel on Independence Boulevard so that I would not be managing highway traffic on the morning of the meeting. I set 2 alarms. I arrived at their office on Tunnel Road in Asheville 12 minutes early. I sat in the lobby and read the brief one more time. I was prepared. Dr. Vivian Holt's office was at the Ardmore Regional Headquarters on Tunnel Road in Asheville, a fact I found quietly appropriate. That the meeting was happening in my own city, in the same general radius where my father had spent 3 decades deciding what I was capable of. The meeting was on a Thursday morning, and it lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes. Dr. Holt was 52. She had trained as an emergency physician, practiced for 11 years, then moved into hospital administration. She had the manner of someone who has made high-stakes decisions under pressure for so long that urgency and calm have merged into a single frequency. She asked me detailed questions about the algorithm's training data methodology, the clinical trial pathway requirements under FDA regulatory guidance, the anticipated integration cost per cardiac unit, and the maintenance and update structure over a 5-year deployment window. I answered every question without notes. When we finished, she stood up and extended her hand. "Miss Mercer," she said, "we would very much like to be part of bringing this to our patients." She paused. She looked at me steadily. "I also want you to know that what you've built here is not a minor contribution. People will be alive in 5 years who would not have been, and that will be because of this work." I shook her hand. I thanked her for her time. I walked to my car, drove 2 blocks, pulled over on a side street, and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel for approximately 30 seconds. Not from relief. From the specific weight of something enormous finally being acknowledged in the world outside my own head. Then I drove home, changed into my scrubs, and went to my shift. I had told my family none of it. Not Harold, not Sylvia Park, not Ardmore, not the patent application, not the meetings, not any of it. My family had a version of me they had agreed upon and maintained for 34 years, and I had decided that their curation project was finished. I was not going to announce that it was finished. I was simply going to show them. Dr. Holt and I spoke by phone the following Tuesday. She told me she liked to mark professional milestones with meaningful moments when the opportunity existed. She asked if there was anything coming up in my personal life, any event where she might make the partnership offer formal and public. I told her about the reunion. I told her about my father. I did not tell her everything. I told her enough. There was a pause on the line. Then Dr. Vivian Holt said, "Diana, I grew up in rural Georgia. My mother told me when I was 16 that medical school was for other people's daughters, that I should think about something more realistic. I am now the chief executive officer of a 14-hospital network. I would be honored to come to your family reunion." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed easily in weeks. If you are still watching at this point in the story, I want you to stop for a moment and leave a comment below. Tell me about your table. Tell me about the moment someone in your family described you to a room full of people and decided, on your behalf, who you were and what you were worth. This channel exists because of those comments, because of every person who has ever written to us and said, "This is my story too." If you have not subscribed yet, please do it now and hit that notification bell, because what happens next in that backyard is something I do not want you to miss. The reunion was held on a Saturday afternoon in early July. My Aunt Paula's property on Elk Mountain Scenic Highway was large enough to accommodate a crowd, with a wide deck off the back of the house and a sloping green yard that could hold folding tables for 30 people without feeling cramped. Paula was my father's older sister, 64 years old, a retired high school English teacher with a wide laugh and a habit of making twice as much food as any gathering required. She had been hosting the Mercer family reunion for 16 years. She hosted it because she believed in it. The guest list this year was 27 people. I arrived at 2:45 in the afternoon. I wore a white linen dress and low-heeled sandals. My hair was down. I brought a fruit salad in a glass bowl because Paula always asked people to bring a dish, and I always brought fruit salad, and I saw no reason to change that. I intended to be exactly who I had always appeared to be, right up until the moment I chose to be something else. My father was already at the property when I arrived, positioned near the cooler at the edge of the deck, talking to my Uncle Frank and a neighbor named Dennis, who came to these gatherings every year. He greeted me the way he always did, a brief hug, a pat on the shoulder. "There she is, our little Florence Nightingale," said with the particular warmth of a man who believes he is being charming. I smiled. I set my fruit salad on the table. I found my cousin Alicia near the drink station and asked about her new job in Raleigh. I was patient. I was warm. I was completely calm. At 4:37 in the afternoon, my father tapped his glass. The toast lasted approximately 2 minutes. He mentioned Thomas by name twice. He mentioned Bradley, my cousin who had made partner, by name once. He mentioned Renee by name once. He said the word nurse, and the phrase still out there and God's work, and several people laughed and one woman said bless her heart. My mother looked at the tablecloth. My sister Renee glanced at me sideways with an expression I could not fully read. My Aunt Paula did not laugh. She pressed her lips together and studied her plate. I lifted my glass. I drank. At 4:49 in the afternoon, a black SUV parked on the road at the edge of Paula's property. The engine went quiet. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a silk blouse and a deep burgundy, dark tailored trousers, and heels that made a clean, deliberate sound on the pavement as she came through the gate. She was carrying a small leather portfolio. People at the outer edge of the table noticed her first. Conversations at that end of the table slowed, and then stopped. She had the kind of presence that does not require volume. She simply moved through the yard with the focused ease of someone who is entirely accustomed to entering a room and having it reorganize itself around her. She found me first because she was looking for me. Her eyes moved across the yard and located me without difficulty, the way someone looks when they have studied a photograph and committed it. She walked toward me, and I rose from my chair. "Diana," she said. "Dr. Holt," I said. She extended her hand. We shook hands. The table was watching now. All 26 of the remaining people at that table. Every conversation had gone silent. My Aunt Paula was the first to speak. "Diana, honey, who is this?" I did not raise my voice. I did not perform anything. I kept my hands relaxed and open at my sides. "Everyone, I'd like to introduce Dr. Vivian Holt. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Ardmore Health Systems." The silence that followed was a particular kind of silence. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of 26 people simultaneously doing arithmetic. Dr. Holt addressed the table directly. "I apologize for arriving unannounced to your family gathering. I'll keep this very brief. I'm here because Diana and I have been working towards something that we'd like to make official, and she was generous enough to allow me to do that here, in front of people who matter most to her." She opened her portfolio. 3 weeks ago, Diana received confirmation of a medical device patent she co-developed with a retired biomedical engineer named Harold Finch. The device is a software-based cardiac monitoring integration system. It consolidates multiple monitoring interfaces into a single unified platform, eliminates a clinically significant signal delay through predictive algorithm modeling, and can flag arrhythmia risk earlier than existing standard monitoring equipment. We believe it will reduce mortality events in hospital cardiac units in a measurable and significant way. She paused and looked at me for just a moment before continuing. "Ardmore Health Systems is pleased to formally offer Diana a licensing partnership and a clinical advisory position to deploy this technology across 8 of our 14 facilities in the first phase of implementation. The total value of the initial partnership is $425,000, with royalty provisions tied to deployment outcomes." She closed the portfolio. "We believe Diana's work will save lives. We are honored to be part of it." My cousin Alicia made a sound that was not a word. My Uncle Frank said, "Lord Almighty," very quietly. My Aunt Paula put both hands over her mouth. My sister Renee had gone completely still. She was looking at me with her eyes wide and bright, and something was moving across her face that I recognized as the specific expression of a person recalibrating everything they thought they knew. My mother had covered her mouth with one hand. Her shoulders were moving slightly. My father was holding his glass of sweet tea, and he had not moved, and his face had done something I had never seen it do in 61 years of living. The confidence had left it, simply and completely gone. What remained was the face of a man who was trying to locate himself inside a moment he had not prepared for. I said nothing. I did not look away from him. Dr. Holt stayed at the reunion for 20 minutes. She spoke with a few family members who gathered around her, answered questions with the same patience and precision she brought to every professional conversation, and then excused herself. I walked her to the gate. She squeezed my arm once, lightly. "You were right," she said. "That was the right room." I thanked her for driving. She said there was nowhere she would rather have been. When I walked back to the table, things had shifted. My father was no longer standing. He was sitting with his chair turned slightly away from the table, and Thomas was beside him talking quietly. Thomas looked up when I came back, and something moved across his face that was partly discomfort and partly something I can only describe as a son recognizing something about his father that he had been deliberately not looking at. My Aunt Paula put her arms around me and held on for a long time. She whispered, "How long?" "Over 4 years," I told her. She pulled back and looked at my face, and her eyes filled. "4 years," she said. "Not one word to a single person." I told her it was not the right time until now. She nodded slowly twice. Then she said, "Your grandmother would have done exactly the same thing." I did not respond to that. I just held her hand for a moment, and then the afternoon continued. My father came to find me 30 minutes later. The table had broken into smaller conversations. Children were chasing each other across the yard. Someone had put music back on through a portable speaker. The reunion had resumed its rhythms, except that it hadn't, because the shape of everything had changed, and we all knew it. He came to the edge of the deck where I was standing alone, looking at the yard. He stopped a few feet from me, and he did not look at me directly at first. He looked out at the same yard I was looking at. "Diana." His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "Dad." He was silent for a moment. The yard noise continued around us. A child laughed somewhere. A screen door opened and closed. "I didn't know," he said. "I had no idea you were doing any of that." I waited. The patent, the company, all those years of work. He stopped, started again. "I didn't know any of it." "I know you didn't," I said. "What I said at the toast today." He stopped again. He rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. "It was wrong. I was wrong." "It's not the first time I've been wrong about you." He said the last sentence slowly, like he was carrying it carefully. "I've had an idea of you in my head for a long time. An idea I built when you were young, and I kept applying it. I never stopped to ask if it still fit." He paused. "It never did fit. I just didn't look closely enough to see that." I did not fill the silence. I had spent 34 years filling silences that were not mine to fill. "I'm sorry, Diana." He said it quietly and directly and without theater. "I am genuinely sorry." I looked at my father. I thought about the parking lot on Marymount Avenue, the certified envelope, my hands completely steady. I thought about Harold Finch saying, "You don't quite understand yet, but you will." I thought about 14 months of second Thursday meetings in a fourth-floor conference room. I thought about Sylvia Park's voice on the phone. "This is genuinely, substantively real." I thought about Dr. Holt driving to a backyard in Asheville on a Saturday afternoon because she understood, without me saying it explicitly, why the room mattered. "Thank you for saying that," I told my father. He looked up. "I'm not going to tell you it's fine," I said. "It hasn't been fine. The things you've said about me over the years, the way you've described me to people, the toast today, none of it was accurate and very little of it was kind. I kept my voice even. I was not performing calm. I was calm. But I don't have room to hold on to it. I have work to do. I have a lot of work ahead of me." I paused. "I would like us to try again if you want to actually know who I am. Not the idea of me, not the version you settled on 30 years ago. The real person." Another pause. "I'm open to that if you are." He nodded. He was blinking rapidly. "Yes," he said. "Yes. I very much want that." We stood side by side and looked at the yard together. A dog ran through the far corner chasing something invisible. Someone's child fell and got up and kept running. The evening light was coming through the trees in long, low bars. Then my cousin's youngest came tearing past us at full speed, and the moment opened and dispersed, and we both exhaled, and the afternoon continued. My sister Renee texted me that night at 11:53. The message said, "I need you to know I am in awe of you. I also need you to know that I am so sorry I didn't see you clearly before now. Can we please talk this week? I have a lot of things that are long overdue." I typed back, "Tuesday, lunch, my choice of restaurant." She replied with a single heart. It was the most honest exchange we had ever had. In the weeks that followed, the work became visible in ways I had not fully anticipated. Harold called on a Monday morning to tell me that a cardiac nursing journal wanted to interview us both about the clinical innovation process, specifically about the pathway from bedside observation to device development, which Harold said was underrepresented in the literature. A professor from UNC's biomedical engineering graduate program reached out to ask if I would be willing to speak to students about what he called the adjacent expertise model, the way clinical professionals with deep domain knowledge can contribute meaningfully to device design without formal engineering credentials. I said yes to both. A colleague stopped me in the hallway at Mission Hospital one afternoon after my shift and said, "I heard what you did. We should have known. I'm sorry we didn't." I thanked her and went home and ate dinner and thought about that sentence. We should have known. I turned it over in my mind, not because I was angry, but because it contained something true, that visibility and effort are not the same thing, and the people around you see what is on the surface unless you build the habit of looking underneath. I called Harold 2 weeks after the reunion to tell him about the professor's invitation. Harold was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what you should tell those students?" I asked what. "Tell them the most important tool you had wasn't the algorithm or the patent application or the connections. It was the notebook. Tell them the night you sat at your kitchen table and wrote 7 pages with a blue pen because you were angry about something real and you refused to decide it was someone else's problem. That is where everything begins, not in the credential, in the refusal." I told him I would remember that. I did. My father called me on a Wednesday afternoon 3 weeks after the reunion. He had questions about the algorithm, about how the predictive modeling worked, about what the clinical trial timeline looked like under FDA guidance, about what licensing meant in practical terms for how the technology would reach patients. He had been reading. He had found technical documentation that Sylvia had filed publicly as part of the patent record, and he had worked through it, and he wanted to understand what he was reading. He did not pretend to have understood it on his own. He asked me to explain. I spent 40 minutes on the phone walking him through it. He listened to every complete answer before asking the next question. He did not interrupt. At the end of the call, he said, "You know, I always thought you were like your mother, patient, good with people, that was your gift." He paused for a long moment. "But that's not who you are. That's only part of who you are. There's a lot more underneath that I never took the time to see." I told him, "No, Dad, it's not all of it." He was quiet. Then he said, "I'm beginning to understand that. I should have understood it much earlier." He paused once more. "I should have asked. I should have asked you a long time ago who you were becoming, instead of deciding I already knew." It was the most honest thing he had said to me in 34 years of conversations. I held on to it without making it more than it was. It was a beginning. Beginnings are enough, if you let them be. I want to speak now to anyone who is watching this and who knows, not suspects, but knows the particular experience I have described. The parent who authored a version of you and has been republishing it for decades without once checking whether it still reflects anything true. The family table where you are always the last one toasted, or where your toast comes wrapped in something smaller than it should be. Something designed to keep the shape of things exactly as they have always been. The room full of people who love you in the wrong direction, with genuine warmth aimed at a stranger who shares your face and your name and your history, but not your interior life. You do not need their permission to become what you already are. That is the most important sentence I know, and I want to say it once more clearly. You do not need to announce your plans to people who have not yet earned the right to witness your process. You do not need to defend the work before it is done. You do not need to make your ambitions smaller so that the people who love you are more comfortable looking at you. The work you do in the margins of your life, in the classes you take alone, the notebooks you fill at kitchen tables at 11:15 at night, the problems you sit with long after everyone else has decided they are unsolvable or someone else's responsibility, that work is real before anyone sees it. The recognition is not the point. It was never the point. I did not spend 4 years building that monitoring system to embarrass my father at a family reunion. I built it because I stood beside a 71-year-old man in a hospital bed and watched a 3-second signal delay stand between him and the care he needed, and I could not walk past that and accept it as simply the way things were. The reunion was just the afternoon. The two halves of my life came into the same room. I could not control when that happened or how it looked when it did. I could only control whether I was ready. I was. Be ready. Build in private. Trust the work before the recognition. And when the recognition comes, let it belong to the work and not to your hunger for it. Give it no power over your sense of yourself, either before it arrives or after. The work is the thing. The work was always the thing. Everything else is just the room finally catching up to what was already true. Do not let the people who have misread you convince you that their reading is the authoritative one. A reader who approaches a text with their eyes closed can tell you nothing useful about the text. My father had decided what I was before I was old enough to show him otherwise. He built his version of me from the materials available to him at the time, and he never once updated the model. He called that knowing me. What it actually was a portrait he stopped adding to in approximately 1998. The tragedy is not that he was cruel. He was not cruel. The tragedy is that affectionate certainty and genuine blindness can look exactly the same from the inside of a family. What I want for you, if you are somewhere right now feeling invisible in a room full of people who are supposed to see you, is this: remember that the description does not become the truth simply because it is delivered with warmth in front of witnesses. You are allowed to disagree. You are allowed to build the correction privately and let it speak when it is ready. You do not owe anyone an announcement. You do not owe anyone a preview. You owe them nothing about the inside of your life until you choose to show it. That is the only response to being underestimated that costs you nothing and returns you everything. Not the moment they see it, not even the expression on their face when they finally understand what they were looking at all along. The thing that matters is the piece you carry, the one you built before any of them were watching, the one that was already there when Dr. Holt walked through the gate, because you had been living inside it for 4 years and it was the most solid thing you owned. My name is Diana Mercer. I am 34 years old. I am a nurse. I am a patent holder. I am a clinical innovator. I am a woman who sat at a table in her family's backyard in a white linen dress and a quiet, unshakable certainty and let the afternoon come to her, because she already knew what was inside it, and she had never needed anyone's permission to know it. I have never been more sure of who I am than I am right now, and I want that for you too. I want you to find your notebook. I want you to find your problem, the specific, stubborn, unsolved thing that has been sitting in the back of your mind because you were told it was someone else's domain. I want you to start. Not when you are ready. Not when you have permission. Now. Tonight. In whatever small and deeply imperfect way you can begin. And here is what I want to leave with you. Not a question about victory, because this was never about winning. A question about truth. If there is someone in your life who has authored a version of you that does not fit, who has been telling that story in rooms you were not in and at tables where your glass was raised last, what would it feel like to stop explaining yourself to them and simply become, entirely and without announcement, the thing they could not see? Tell me in the comments. I want to read every single one. To every person who stayed with this story from the beginning to this moment, I want you to know something sincerely. You did not land on this video by accident. Something in it was already true for you before you pressed play, whether it was the family table, the father who decided early, the years of invisible work, or simply the feeling of being the one who is always fine, who does not need anything, who will manage. You felt something watching this, and that feeling is worth paying attention to. We build every story on this channel for you. Not for the abstract idea of you, but for you specifically, the one who is tired of being the reliable one, and never the celebrated one, the one who has been carrying something extraordinary in silence because the moment was not yet right. We believe your story deserves to be told with the same precision and care that Diana brought to her years of quiet work. So if this moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment telling us the moment that hit you hardest, because we read them and they shape every story we choose to tell. Next, new episodes go up every single day on Revenge Chronicles. where the quietest comebacks are always the ones that last. Subscribe, tap that notification bell, and come back tomorrow. We are so deeply grateful you are here.